So this section is called Researchers, and I'm starting here with slide number 139. So I want to basically give some resources for people to research this for themselves. That's ultimately what this is all about. So with the cosmic abandonment slides for this podcast, and by the way, this will be podcast 172, I have put together a list, finally, of all the people who I recommend that people research into deeply to start to have a handle on this topic. And I've made a little 3 links next to them, basically. Next to each researcher's name or author's name or presenter's name, there is a little G link, a little Y link, and an A link. Okay, so the key is right up above this section, above their names, underneath where it says researchers to explore. And I should take the word into out. It really just should say researchers to explore when studying interference theory of human origins. And there's a key right below that. The G link for each researcher will take you to a Google search of that researcher. So you don't even have to type their name or copy their name into a search engine. You just click that link and you'll be presented with a whole bunch of search results regarding that individual. If you click the Y, it will do a YouTube search on their name. And again, you may get different results. Certain people will have more, videos available. Certain people might not have any videos available. But it's there nonetheless as a resource to, if you want to research a particular person's work, you click on that. It'll do a YouTube search on it if there's any videos related to their work. Then if you click the A, that will take you to an Amazon.com search. There's other bookstores and whatnot and places to obtain hard copies of materials, but Amazon is a pretty well-known one. It's, deals with a lot of merchants all over the world, so you can click that. If you wanted to do it, maybe an eBay search, look for different prices or whatever shopping outlet you like, you can go and search on places that accept Bitcoin if you use that. It's up to you, but I just provided one link where you could find materials to buy from these researchers. And so I went with Amazon because it's probably the easiest and the most familiar for people. So if you click the A, that will take you to an Amazon search for that individual researcher, and you can see what materials are available by them in the form of books or DVDs or things like that. So with that having been said, let's jump into this section. I'll move on to slide number 140 and talk a little bit about some of these researchers. The first I want to mention is, and I'll mention probably all of them in this list that I compiled, but I want to really focus on some of who I would consider the heavyweights or the really important people to study. The other thing I want to say, and I always do whenever I talk about other people's work, because if you don't give this caveat, you have a million people knocking down your door saying, how could you get behind this person? He said this. Do you agree with that? I don't agree with everything that any of these people have said or write about. I think their research is valuable. I think you need to look into it to put a bigger picture together. You come to the truth by doing eclectic research. That means gathering all your grammar from various sources of information. You gather all the seemingly disparate pieces of information, you bring them together, and then you start filtering it, and you work through it, and you say, look at these commonalities. Look at this person, doing this research. How did he do this? What was the process he used to look into that? Here's his conclusions. What are these people's conclusions? Does it make sense when it fits together? Does it explain what's going on now in a more clear way, in a way that makes sense? You could ask so many questions regarding these people's work. It doesn't mean I agree with everything any particular one of them says. I think their work is valuable and is worth looking into. Okay, so Eric von Däniken is the first. This is slide 140. He's written a slew of books, made tons of documentaries. Chariots of the Gods, of course, is his most well-known work. He also wrote a book called Gods from Outer Space, which I definitely recommend to people. It's one that I think people would really get a lot out of. Some of these books are still in print. Some you can find, again, on Amazon or eBay or something like that. Some of them may have fallen out of print and may be a little bit more difficult or expensive to find. And many of them you can also find online. You could actually download them in either PDF format, portable document format, or electronic book format, EPUB format, electronic publication. So, you could do torrent searches if you want to try to find these people's work. You could, in many cases, you could... as is the case with many of these researchers' work, you could, request my ARC drive, my amazing repository of knowledge hard drive, which many people have requested from me. It's actually really has gone very well, the distribution of the research that I've compiled over the years online. I've probably already given out over 150 of these drives. It's a real simple process. You just email me from the contact page and say you want the ARC. I mean, it's right there on the contact page of the website, and many people have taken me up on this offer, and it's worked out pretty good. I send a list of very clear, detailed instructions, which people do have to follow if they want to receive that offer, without any problems. But most people follow it to the letter, and they get the research, and it's a lifetime of research. Look, just this little tiny research list that I am providing here with this podcast today will keep you busy for multiple lifetimes. You will not be able to go through all of these people's material if you lived probably 10 lifetimes. Okay, that's how voluminous and proliferous their work is. All right, so this is stuff that you have to take it a little at a time. Let synchronicity carry you. People always say to me also, where do I start? Start where you're interested in. Start, find somebody that you already resonate with some of their work. Their work will take you to other people's work. You will be where you need to. You will go where you need to be. Okay? The universe has a way of working things out like that when you're seeking the light. When you're looking for knowledge, when you're looking for truth, synchronicities pop up left and right constantly, almost on a minute-to-minute basis. That's how it was during my rapid awakening process, when I really kicked into high gear. Of course, my initial awakening stage was very slow, and I had to come out and decondition myself from, satanic thought, from the, dark occultism that I was involved in my youth. But don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on Republic Broadcasting. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. I want to apologize. I think I spoke right through the last network break because there was a slight technical problem on the network, and I did not hear the break coming through my headphones in my studio here. So no worries. You can still hear that content when I put my podcast up on my website, because I actually record everything here on this end. That's what I edit my podcast from. So for those who missed out on a little bit by listening over the network, you could just check that out on the podcast page. Nothing was lost. But I do apologize for that, and hopefully we'll reel in the slight technical issues. But let's continue on with the presentation and these researchers' names. Again, I was saying that you have to put together all of these seemingly disparate pieces of information, and then you see the full puzzle picture. A lot of people aren't willing to do that work. They don't want to do the reading. They don't want to do the homework. They don't want to take that time and that effort. So, they'll say, oh, he said something that I don't like, and I'm done listening to him. That's unfortunately how most people's broken reasoning works. They won't actually sit and listen to something that they potentially disagree with. See, again, this whole dynamic of the mark of real, true intelligence is being able to consider a notion or consider a piece of information without at first accepting it or rejecting it. And you would be surprised how many people cannot or are unwilling to do that. I've actually asked someone to their face, are you the kind of person who is capable? Just ask this question to an individual that I saw out on the street at some kind of a rally. I think it was a rally to try to get marijuana decriminalized here in Philadelphia. And I was asking one of the people who attended the rally, I was talking about consciousness and how, it's never brought up that you own your own consciousness, you own your own body, and somebody telling you that you may not put something into your body is a claim of ownership on that body and consciousness, and therefore it's slavery. And I said, no one ever makes the right to use whatever drug you want to use an issue of slavery. And the person was so got so, flummoxed and offended by this, which is it's really the real issue that goes on with any concept of prohibition. And this person didn't understand the principle of self-ownership behind it that they're like, look, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I don't want to hear anything else that you have to say. This is how unconscious and unready to hear truth this particular individual was. And I said, just listen, what do you need to take that kind of a all or nothing approach for? I said, there's no possibility of interchange or interaction for information with you, clearly. I said, just answer me this one question and then I'll leave you alone. Are you the kind of person that is capable of listening to information or reading information or watching information and reserving judgment about what you've just seen, heard, or watched, okay? Read, heard, or watched. And just putting the idea somewhere in your thought processes of your mind, but not actually immediately accepting it as being true or rejecting it as being completely false. And the person said, to be honest, no, I am not capable of doing that. When I hear, see, or read something, almost immediately I make a judgment decision about it. And it either fits into what I already think, in which case I think it's true, or I reject it because, it completely conflicts with the way I already think. They actually said that to me. And I said, goodbye, there is no help for you. I said, there is nothing I can show you. There is nothing I can teach you. There is nothing I can do for you. I cannot assist you in any way. That's called the 100% calcified ego. That's what the ego is, ladies and gentlemen. That's one of the things that the ego is, the deep calcified ego attachment. That's what it is right there. It's no better way could I describe it to people. And this is what you see when it comes to this topic. People don't want to do the research. They don't want to listen to someone else and just put it in their mind. And then you could sort it out after. You don't have to accept everything Eric von Däniken says. You don't have to accept everything Lloyd Pye or William Bramley or Zechariah Sitchin say. But you can take it in, and you could keep it in your mind and say, hey, how does this fit into the bigger picture? Is there something to be learned from this? Is there anything of value here that I could explore, that I could learn from? No, most people are unwilling to do that. They already have their belief system and information be damned. That's where most people's head is at. So the next researcher on slide 141 I want to call to people's attention is Zechariah Sitchin. Zechariah Sitchin has put out some of the most proliferous amounts of work when it comes to the ancient aliens / interference theory hypothesis out of any other researcher. And he's often, along with Eric von Däniken, considered kind of like, the grandfather of this field of research. And, there is just so much in the way of books that he's written. And his books are they read like textbooks. He's put out the whole Earth Chronicles series, starting with the famous 12th Planet book, which I highly recommend. Other books in that series were Stairway to Heaven, Wars of Gods and Men, which I actually amazingly just found in a trash pile in outside of a thrift store. The Wars of God and Men was sitting in the trash for stuff to give away for free. This is the kind of stuff I come across when I'm walking the streets of Philadelphia. I magically am there at the right moment. It's a book I have digitally, but I didn't have a hard, printed copy of it. So, of course, I took it. I found another book by Sitchin in like a bargain basement section of a thrift store, The End of Days. That was his most recent one. Other books in the Earth Chronicles were The Lost Realms, When Time Began was book 5, book 6 was The Cosmic Code, and then End of Days was the last one in that series. I believe he wrote that shortly before he passed a few years ago. There's also Divine Encounters, Genesis Revisited, Journeys to the Mythical Past. There were Giants Upon the Earth, and then, of course, The Lost Book of Enki, which is just an amazing recounting of the ancient story that happened between the quote-unquote gods, these non-human entities that came to the earth in the ancient past, and the early human beings who they basically were ruling over like gods, as the authority figures and the kings on the earth back in the ancient past. So highly recommended is Sitchin's work. He also appears in a lot of documentaries on this topic. Let's move on to the next researcher, Lloyd Pye. Lloyd Pye, of course, famous for the Star Child skull exploration, which he's done a lot of great work with and DNA analysis on. And his books, Everything You Know Is Wrong and Alien Origins, that's really the main crux of Pye's work, is human origins and hominids, and how human beings are not evolved from our hominid ancestors, but are a result of genetic manipulation. I think Pye's work is some of the best in this regard, and I really highly recommend everybody checking him out. You could go to his website. You could download some of his videos on YouTube. Just brilliant stuff. And unfortunately, he passed back in 2012, the week that I did this original presentation of Cosmic Abandonment here in Philadelphia. Slide 143, William Bramley, most famous for writing the book The Gods of Eden, which is a book about, again, the early human experience with the gods still living, the quote-unquote gods still living on the earth with us. Bramley takes kind of a little bit of a different approach, and I think he somewhat sees it as they were trying to uplift us and make us. They were our creators, our gods, quote unquote, and some of them were there to try to bring humanity out of its early mental state of barbarism and degeneration, which of course they put us in. He kind of doesn't really get too much of a down attitude toward these beings. Certainly I do. I don't see these beings as moral or ethical in any way. I've said that time and time again. Second hour of the show, and we are continuing with the extended Cosmic Abandonment presentation, as we have for many weeks here on the show. I'm going to get right back to the slides. We were on slide number 143. I was talking about William Bramley's take on the quote gods of the ancient past, the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, etc. He kind of lets them off the hook a little bit easy for my taste. I really look at everything they did here as very immoral. And, some of them tried to clean up the mess afterward. But, some of them didn't want to do it, didn't want to do what they went ahead and did. But they did it anyway, So it's kind of like they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. We don't understand morality just like our parents didn't understand it. So very unfortunate, but true. So let's move on to slide 144. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit because I really want to get to some callers who are holding and take some more calls throughout the show. So let's move on to slide 144. Michael Tellinger. His book, Slave Species of the Gods, is perhaps the single most important book that has ever been written on this entire phenomenon, on this area of research, etc. Okay? People have to read this book. That's all I'm going to say about this guy. This book is required reading. If you don't already have it, get it. If you haven't already read it. Okay? He's also done a lot of good work with the concept of Ubuntu. He has a book out called Contributionism, a Blueprint for Human Prosperity, which is also an excellent book. Michael's take on ending money, I certainly agree with. Some of his methodologies I don't particularly agree with. I don't think he has a firm enough handle on the concept of ownership, which is what all rights are based upon. And many people who are, I'm not saying this about Michael in particular, I'm just saying many people in general out in the world who are very right-brained don't have a concept of the true concept of ownership. They don't have that understood, and they want to try to say that there's no such thing as ownership. It's like, if you're too left-brained, you think there's such a thing as authority. If you're too right-brained, you think there's no such thing as ownership. Well, these two things go hand in hand together, because if you don't claim ownership of yourself, ladies and gentlemen, authoritarians who believe in authority come over and claim it for you very readily. And if people still don't understand the concept of self-ownership, I mean, God help us. What can you say? I mean, what else needs to be said that hasn't already been said? Now, that's the way I think of things nowadays. It's like, really? People are still this deep in unconsciousness? And this long, all these people have been talking about these things. All this information's out there, and still, people haven't even begun. Or have gone so far off track in one form of imbalance or the other, they continue to believe in authority, or they actually have worked themselves into an imbalanced state to believe that the whole concept of ownership is completely and utterly illegitimate, needs to be thrown out the door. So nothing could actually be owned, including my body, my consciousness, while I'm inhabiting this body in this physical vehicle. Somebody would say, I don't own this, because they want to take things to the right brain extreme of, it's not eternal. Well, nothing has to be eternal for you to own something. My computer isn't eternal, but I own it. It's my property. My body's not eternal either, but I own it. It's my property while my consciousness is inhabiting it. But some people are just never going to understand it. They're never going to understand. They're off in a spiritual daze. They don't get it because their brain is burnt. Their brain's all burnt up from whatever drugs they've done, from whatever endless meditations they've sat doing. The whole spiritualism movement has just gone so awry, it's made these super right-brained individuals. And please, I'm not referring to Michael Tellinger here. I'm talking about people in general who are very right-brained and balanced. I think Michael Tellinger is a very well thought individual. I just think he needs to firm up his understanding of ownership, and that, there are certain physical items that are more important than other physical items. It's kind of like a point of contention that I have with some of his work, which, like I said, I don't agree with everything everybody says or teaches or talks about. But one thing I will tell you is that Slave Species of the Gods will give you a very firm understanding of the events that happened here in the ancient past. The subtitle of the book is The Secret History of the Anunnaki and Their Mission on Earth. I highly recommend the book. I think anybody who's studying this topic needs to get that book and read it. Next researcher, slide 145, David Icke. Not enough can be said about David Icke. Again, most people have not looked at any of his real information because they will not sit and read his books in their entirety. That's where his information is laid out in their tapestry. That's what he is. He's an author of books. He doesn't do podcasts like I do. He does, very large presentations, similar to my all-day seminars. But his main area of focus is writing. That's what he does. This is what I more than not loathe to do. I'm not, by my nature, someone who really likes to write words, but when I do write, I can write well. Again, I'm working with an editor to get a book out by sometime next year. But David's work is in his books, and for people who really want to look at the information that he has assembled and put together and aggregated. You need to read his books in their entirety. And they're long, big books that read like textbooks. Again, this is not information that is put out there to entertain people. So you have fun with it. They're not picture books. It's not like, you're going to jam out to some rock music. It requires focus and intent and dedication and time and energy and effort. Nobody wants to put those things into that. We want just self-gratification. So when you tell people you're going to need to read to understand this for a long time, like I said, I shut myself in, basically in my room, in my house for practically the better part of a decade. Mark, why are you so antisocial? Mark, why don't you interact with people? Mark, why don't you talk to family members? Because I'm sitting here learning about what's really going on this slavery planet. That's why. That's what that time was used to do, to awaken myself. That's not easy work. That means repeating over and over again, I was wrong about this, I was wrong about that, I was wrong about this, I was wrong about that. And then taking in the correct information and understanding how it all fits together in a tapestry that makes sense of the world, of the crazy, insane asylum in which we live. And I think here's a guy who has done brilliant work when it comes to decoding that entire matrix of information. The book I highly recommend is Children of the Matrix, particularly on the interference theory hypothesis. His other books are also equally as brilliant, and The Truth Shall Set You Free. If people have the patience to go through it, is a great book for waking up people who are beginning on their journey, for just some of the 3D worldly aspects of the whole, conspiratorial aspects of things that are going on in this world. If people would simply take the time and just read that book, so many things would be answered. He wrote Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster. He wrote The Guide to the Global Conspiracy, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees, Infinite Love is the Only Truth, Everything Else is Illusion, The Biggest Secret, The Robot's Rebellion, Tales from the Time Loop. You can go on, and others. So his work is, again, huge. And his books are big, and they're very well sourced and referenced. You could research in one of his chapters, probably for a lifetime, with just the endnotes to the chapter, and go and read the other books that he cites. It's just amazing work. And again, I've talked about his courage before. If the world had 1/10 of this guy's courage, we'd be free already. This guy is not afraid to speak his mind and come forward and say what he thinks, regardless of what anybody else thinks about what he's saying. So I personally have a tremendous amount of respect for him, and we'll continue with some more researchers and their work on the other side. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on RBN. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. I'm going to continue to move through some of the researchers that I think people should be aware of and check out their work. The next person is Credo Mutwa. David Icke has done a lot of work with him, particularly in his series, The Reptilian Agenda. He's an African Sanusi shaman from the Zulu tribe in Western Africa, and he's a library of information. One of his people's, keepers of knowledge to tell people about the origins of humanity and the events that took place in our ancient past. Highly recommend his work. He also has a book. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I'm sure you'll come across it in the links that I have provided. The next researcher on slide number 147 is Michael Tessarion, who I have an absolutely tremendous amount of respect for and consider him a mentor to myself and my work. And his Origins and Oracles series must be viewed, period. I mean, it's just absolutely 100% required viewing for anybody that is trying to decode what is going on in this world, period. And the work is just, it's an enormous in scope, and he presents it brilliantly and in a scholarly fashion. You could actually watch that all on YouTube if you just type in Origins and Oracles. It's out there, or you could find it on a torrent site. He's also done a lot of work on the Irish origins and influence of early civilization, and he's put out a great documentary called Architects of Control. can't recommend Michael Tessarion enough. Also, his recent work with the Major Arcana of the Tarot is brilliant as well. So do check out his website as well, and check out his work on YouTube, and pick up some of his books. Graham Hancock is the next researcher on slide 148. Famous for Fingerprints of the Gods, famous for his series called The Lost Civilization, the video series. I highly recommend people watch that one. Doesn't get into ancient astronaut or cosmic abandonment / interference theory that much, but his work on the ancient world is absolutely worth checking out, and his work that there were ancient civilizations here in the distant past, and the progression of technology and civilization has not been linear. His work really demonstrates that beautifully. Slide 149, Michael Cremo, famous for the tome Forbidden Archaeology, which presents many cases of suppressed archaeological evidence that is basically thrown in basements of anthropological and archaeological museums and universities, never to be seen, because it doesn't fit into the existing paradigm that the entrenched researchers, so-called, want to tell people about the linear origins of humanity, the linear progression of civilization and humanity. And the whole Darwinian macrobiological evolutionary theory, quote-unquote evolutionary theory. Cremo demonstrates that not only is technology and civilization much older than we think, but it goes into advanced technologies of the ancient world, evidence for that. It's just a book that people really just have to look into and see how much suppressed evidence that there is to support alternative theories and hypotheses for human origins and the events that took place here in our ancient past that shaped and forged civilization as we know it today, so-called civilization. The next researcher on slide 150 is L.A. Marzulli. I think this gentleman has done great work when it comes to looking at ancient architecture, evidence for these beings' existence, these quote-unquote gods, Anunnaki / Nephilim, gods of the ancient world. He's done a series called Watchers, a video series. It's like a video magazine series, just incredibly well put together, where he interviews a lot of researchers. He goes to different countries and looks at different evidence. Great work in tandem with Brian Forster, who I'm also going to recommend later. And he's got a few books out as well, so I really recommend his work. He takes a little bit of a traditional Christian perspective that these beings are in fact fallen angels. I tend to disagree with that conclusion, but nonetheless I think his work is very well put together and very much worthy of people's time and consideration. The slide 151 deals with David Hatcher Childress and his work. His focus has been on the ancient technology that these beings used when they were here, and the science behind them. He's also done some work into the beings themselves with looking at the whole skull, elongated skull evidence, and how this was not just cranial deformation done with binding, but in many cases that which the cultures that did do that were mimicking the gods, their quote gods, the beings that were here and acting as gods over us because they had essentially created us. So Childress's work is very good. He's also in many different documentaries that deal with UFOs and the ancient aliens hypothesis. Slide 152, Trey Smith. His main work has been looking at the Nephilim and the stories of them in the ancient past. Great long DVD series called The Nephilim, The Truth. He's also done another pretty good series called Noah. I definitely recommend checking out his stuff. Again, a little bit more of that Christian perspective, that traditional Christian perspective. But again, I'm not going to hold that completely against somebody, regardless of what religious tradition they want to view this in from a filter through. That's their filter that they're processing it through. I could still listen to the information and take what is valuable to me from it without having to accept their conclusion regarding what these beings are, what it means in the spiritual aspect, you know. So they could have their look at what this means spiritually, and I could have my look at what it means spiritually. It doesn't mean that I think that all their data needs to be thrown out. You know, I don't look at this from that type of a traditional Christian perspective. But nonetheless, many researchers who do study this have come from it from that biblical perspective, and I don't have that much of a problem with that. Again, I don't have to agree with their conclusion, but I can look at all the evidence that they've aggregated, and that can basically be put into the huge pool of resources and evidence to draw from and help understand the dynamic better. Georgios Tsoukalos is on slide number 153, of course, very famous for his Ancient Aliens series, which I definitely think is really worth watching. The earlier ones, I think, are some of the more densely information-packed, and then, you know, as they are more pressed to come up with some original information, some of the later ones may stretch a bit and, you know, put forward some deeper conjecture than I would prefer. But nonetheless, the Ancient Aliens series, particularly the early ones, is excellent viewing, and I definitely recommend people watch those. The next researcher on slide number 154, Immanuel Velikovsky, of course, famous for his Worlds in Collision book about the formation of the early solar system and how heavenly bodies collided and, you know, released tremendous amounts of energy into our solar system. He was ridiculed endlessly for this whole hypothesis, and, you know, in more modern times, he's been kind of vindicated, and a lot of, you know, cosmological evidence has proved him correct. So a couple more researchers I want to talk about on the other side, and then hopefully we can get to your calls in a couple of segments. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening? We'll be right back. Mark Passio. We're continuing with the extended cosmic abandonment presentation, talking about researchers and their work in this field. We're moving on to slide number 155. If you're following along with the slides, this is Robert Schoch. Schoch basically talks about how the Sphinx has weathering patterns that are not consistent with air or wind, but water. It's one of his main focuses of his work, which basically makes its antiquity much older than what traditional Egyptologists have talked about. So he has a book out called Forgotten Civilization, and basically, again, gets into how our, you know, worldview and our paradigm of what human culture and civilization has been like, you know, is not the linear progression that we think that it is, and many events in the past have basically rapidly changed, you know, what is the events that have occurred on this planet. His book is about, you know, the sun and its, you know, sunspots and solar flares that have affected things here on the Earth. Again, another theme in this whole field is cataclysms and research into Earth changes. That fits hand in hand with the story of the beings that came here in the ancient past and affected us. In many cases, they use these cataclysms to take advantage of, you know, their whole view of themselves as our gods, and also in some cases there is evidence to speculate or support the possibility that these beings caused cataclysms, that they actually had technology that was so advanced that it could actually cause cataclysmic events on a planetary scale. So moving on, the next slide is slide 156. D.S. Allen and J.B. Dallaire, together these two scientists wrote a book on essentially cataclysms that have happened in the Earth's past, and they focus on the last major cataclysm that happened over 10,000 years ago here on Earth. Again, this is a very consistent stream of data that comes in through a lot of other researchers, including people like Schock, Velikovsky, Graham Hancock, Michael Cremo, and others. So this book is another huge tome, but it's got a lot of really important information in it regarding how certain cataclysms may have happened in the ancient past on the Earth. So another highly recommended book, and they really do a very scholarly job with that book. Some researchers that I did not put in the slideshow, because again I had very limited time. I just wanted to point to people some of the what I would consider the most important information to look at, but nonetheless there's so many other researchers out there in this field that it's way bigger than most people think. I just want to mention some other people's names and briefly mention some of the things that they have done. You want to look into William Cooper, of course. His book Beyond a Pale Horse lays out a lot of information about humanity's involvement with some of these beings. Jordan Maxwell has talked about interference with humanity in his presentations. Again, a brilliant researcher, very courageous individual too. Brian Forrester has done some of the best work with the elongated skulls evidence, and he's also done a lot of great work with Nephilim architecture. His work is highlighted in L.A. Marzulli's Watchers video series. I definitely recommend all 7 of the Watchers videos. I think he's coming out with an 8th one very soon too. So Brian Forrester also has a good YouTube channel. I'm sure if you click the YouTube link, you'll come across that in the links that I've provided. Richard Hoagland, I think, has a lot of great information on ancient civilizations on other planets in our solar system, namely Mars. Somebody I've been following his work for, 20 years. Just absolutely great stuff. Again, I wouldn't say I agree with everything that he thinks, or I would say he needs to go further in some of his understanding and areas of research, particularly when it comes to government and authority. But in general, I like his work, and I think that he is a person who's trying to get at the truth of what happened here in our very ancient past. Richard Mooney wrote the book called Gods of Air and Darkness, which is another great book, old, not very difficult to find in print anymore, but deals with a lot of ancient technology and hypotheses about beings that may have come here in the ancient past. Also gets into a little bit about the possibility of the moon being a non-natural object that possibly may have been artificially created, similar to some of the things David Icke talks about when he talks about the moon in his newer material. Rob Skiba, or Skiba, I'm still not really sure about the pronunciation. I think it's Skiba. He has some great videos on the Nephilim on YouTube. I definitely recommend people check those out. Again, kind of a traditionalist Christian perspective, but again, I don't have to agree with his conclusions to look at his data. Jay Widener, done a lot of work on alchemy and the Great Cross of Henday. He wrote that book with Vincent Bridges. I definitely recommend that. But he also gets into the archons and what they may be. And this kind of overlaps and fits in with the interference theory hypothesis as well. Paul LaViolette, another scientist who has done a lot of research when it comes to cataclysmic events and what may cause them. He talks about Seyfert galaxy explosions in his book Earth Under Fire that may send out gravity waves from the center of galaxies and affect planets in the outer recesses of the galaxy. Definitely a book worth checking out. Connor McDarry, again, this is a researcher Michael Tessarion often points to in some of his work. He's done some work with humanity in the Eden time period, the whole Garden of Eden story. Ignatius Donnelly has done a lot of brilliant work regarding Atlantis and lost ancient civilizations. His work is actually very, very scholarly put together and worth checking out. John Anthony West does a lot of work with the ancient Cometian or Egyptian civilization and their whole belief system and spirituality. Definitely a gentleman I highly respect and recommend people looking into. Mark Pinkham, he wrote the book called The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom, which deals with this topic. Steve Quayle, he's done a lot of research and work with the Nephilim and giants, etc. Thomas Horn, again, a lot of work with Nephilim. Both Quayle and Horn take, again, a Christian perspective when it comes to it. Will Hart, he's a lesser-known researcher. He wrote the book called The Genesis Race, Our Extraterrestrial DNA and the True Origins of the Species. A great book, which I definitely recommend people checking out. Rick Smith, also known as the UFO teacher. He's done a lot of great work on this topic. He's also put together a lot of work about the Moorish legacy and its suppression by the entrenched powers that should not be. I definitely recommend Rick Smith's work. I was recommending him for the Free Your Mind 3 conference. I'm not sure if the new organizers are going to look into his work and take him on board, but I'd like to see him speak there. W. Raymond Drake has also put out, I believe, several books on this topic. Let me see if I could find the one that I was recommending for people. It's called Gods and Spacemen in the Ancient East. Goes into, the Vedic gods and, their ancient technology that they used and how these were basically recountings of beings that came here from another place. So, Drake's work is definitely worth looking into. There's Andrew Tomas. I believe I'm saying that right. He wrote a book called We Are Not the First, about a lot of, proof of ancient technologies and beings that had come here, lost science and technology. Pretty good work. Let's see. Robert Charot, if I'm saying that properly. He's it's obviously a French name or a French-Canadian name. He wrote the book called Forgotten Worlds. I believe he also wrote the book called The Book of the Masters of the Earth. But Forgotten Worlds is, again, postulates, scientific and technological advancements of beings from the ancient past. And, there's some other earthishappening.com. I'm going to try to go to the phones in this segment. I'm going to just wrap up this section on researchers briefly. But let me give the call-in number to join us here live on the air. 800-313-9443. Again, the call-in number to join us on What on Earth is Happening. 800-313-9443. That's a toll-free number. And there's no taboo topics here on the show. There never is. We're talking about the interference theory of human origins, but I won't limit the discussion to that. You could basically ask anything you want, comment about anything you want that I've talked about or covered so far, or anything else you want to bring up. So that's the toll-free number to join us. And let me go back to wrap up these last couple of names that I wanted to put out there. I was talking about Andrew Thomas and Robert Charot. Let's move to R.L. Dion. He put out something called God Drives a Flying Saucer, which had a very interesting kind of biblical take on the whole phenomenon. Again, kind of a alternative Christian perspective, you might say, but I think still worth checking out for some of the information he puts out in that book. Josh Reeves is one of the few freedom-oriented hosts and researchers that has really talked about this topic on air a lot, at least from a open-minded perspective that has gone into this topic in depth a little bit. So I definitely recommend checking out some of the things he's talked about regarding this. Alan Landsberg was the individual who put out the television series In Search Of. And he also, I believe, wrote some books on the topic, if I'm not mistaken. But the In Search Of series really went into a lot of alternative explanations about different things in the world and, mysteries of the past. And hidden technologies, occulted technologies, etc. So it was a very well put together series. I believe it was done back in the early 80s, if I'm not mistaken. It could have been in the late 70s. I think it was in the late 70s. But he also wrote a book called In Search of Ancient Mysteries, and it definitely deals with a lot of these topics as well, and is a decent read. So they're all the researchers I want to talk about. I'm sure people will have many others and can point out, names that I've missed. But this is just intended to be an introductory list to get people interested in the topic and looking at it with an open-minded perspective and understanding there's a lot of different perspectives that people come at this from, and there is a whole lot of data to be looked at. But that's what finding the truth is all about. That's what truth discovery is all about. It's about gathering the information from a wide, eclectic variety of sources and looking at it all without prejudging it, and then performing a filtration process upon it to be able to get the big picture about what is really going on. So if you do that, then I think you'll understand the bigger picture and the big pattern that the powers that should not be in this world don't want us to see or understand. So I think if we do that, we'll be one step closer to really understanding ourselves. That's what this is all about. See, people will say, well, why do we need to know about all this stuff that happened? Isn't that ancient history? Isn't that all in the past? Yes, but no. I'm not saying dwell on this. I'm not saying let this be, the be-all and end-all of your life. I'm saying, but if you don't understand the past, you don't have a accurate framework for understanding how we got to where we're at today. That's why this is so important to understand. You have to understand what happened here that put the human mindset in the psychological framework that it is in. And again, that mindset is all about abandonment. That's the root issue. Because from abandonment issues with mother and father, you get, I'm not worthy. I have to find a surrogate mother or father figure. I don't have true deep self-respect or self-esteem. Therefore, I am not confident in my own decision-making because I didn't have that guidance there. And I don't want that responsibility that comes along with truly discerning and judging right from wrong for myself. So I want to give that responsibility over to somebody else. And I'm just going to stay willfully ignorant of the true difference between right and wrong morally. And that's where we're at in society. This is what society has become, folks. And this psychological framework didn't just happen all at once, one day. This was born due to circumstances. And this hypothesis, this theory, if you will, readily explains the fertile ground in which this psychological framework grew from. Cosmic abandonment. Our cosmic parents left this place, abandoned us here, put beings that were all about authority and control and domination in charge of us. And then we inherited that legacy. And again, I'm not stating they're possibly not still around or monitoring the situation. People want to, say, well, what makes you think they're not here? Cosmic abandonment isn't about them not being here. It's about the fact that they are not here openly. They left. The parents made us and left. Okay, they made something that was like a baby that they really didn't want except for specific purposes. It would be the equivalent, like I said, of somebody who was very, very destitute and believes in authority and wants to rely on the state, having a child only to get income money, welfare money from the state. But, they did this for their purposes. They wanted workers for whatever their purposes were, for whatever their reasons, for mining whatever resources that they wanted to take from this planet, and that's what they used us for, or so many of the stories go, if you accept, that part of the stories. So, the whole point here is if we don't understand the conditions from which we came from in the ancient past, we're not really going to have an effective understanding of the psychological framework of humanity in the modern day. And that's what this entire presentation was designed to try to help people to grasp. So next week, what I will start to get into, since I've, for kind of the second time, gone into some of these researchers' work and finally, aggregated a little list of them and put some links out there so people again can just click on the link. They don't even have to type the name or get the spelling right. It's all right there, and you can research in 3 different major areas of the web: Google, the major search engine; Yahoo, the major video YouTube, the major video website; and Amazon, a big outlet for books and DVDs. So I'll leave this section there, and next week I'm going to be talking about some fictional allegories that have really presented in kind of a brilliant way this ancient story. Whether it's conscious or deliberate or not, it really highlights a lot of the aspects of the ancient story of our past through allegorical fiction.